Welcome to the Frisco ISD podcast. I am Chief Operations Officer Scott Warstler, and I'm guest hosting the podcast for a candid discussion with Chief Finance and Strategy Officer Kim Smith and Deputy Superintendent Dr. Todd Fouche about the bond propositions in the upcoming November election. Frisco ISD has 4 propositions that will be up for vote on November 5th. Today, we will learn about the propositions, answer a few commonly asked questions, and give you an inside look at the district. Just a reminder, early voting begins Monday, October 21st, concluding with the election day on November 5th. Well, good morning, Todd and Kim. Thanks for joining me this morning. One of the propositions is a VATRE, or a voter-approved tax rate election, and the other 3 are bond propositions. What's the difference?
So a VATRE, we're talking about really salaries and programming for students. We're talking about things that are expendable in a year's time. 85% of our maintenance and operations budget is people. We're a very people-intensive business. And when we're talking about the difference between the VATRE and the bond, the VATRE really focuses on salaries and programming. The bond is focusing on long-term debt, school buildings, repairs for school buildings, that type of thing.
Let's start with the 4 propositions. Proposition A, or the VATRE, is asking the voters to decide if they are willing to raise their taxes by 3 cents for each $100 valuation. Where would the VATRE money go?
The VATRE money would help us maintain staff salaries and student programming to our current standards. So it would generate about $11.5 million for the district to go into our maintenance and operations budget, which, as Todd mentioned, is about 85% people. And so it would help us pay for those things.
Some in the community have said that, like households, Frisco ISD needs to live within its means. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, I think it is a fair comparison with just a little bit of a difference. So one of the things that we're required to do in order to put a VATRE on the ballot is have an efficiency audit. And so we did that over the summer. We hired a third-party independent auditor to go through the plan that's been prescribed by the state to determine if we are spending as efficiently as we can. And so the results of that audit are posted on our website. What they found essentially is that we are already more efficient than a lot of our peers across the state. One difference between the school district, quote, living within our means, and a household is that, as we've already talked about, school district budgets are 85% payroll. So when we're talking about needing to slim down or live within a fixed income, we're talking about affecting people's jobs and programs that directly impact our students. So the idea is that we want to maintain those standards as much as possible before we're in a position to have to cut some of those things.
I think it's important, too, that what we're asking for is it's 3 cents per every $100 valuation, which on the average home in Frisco works out to about $13 a month. And we're really talking about a cost of living increase. We haven't had a cost of living increase. We've got no additional funding from the state since 2019. And we all know how much inflation's happened during that time period. So what we're asking for is trying to keep our salaries up and competitive with those around us and even industries around us.
I think one more thing to point out on the VATRE and the 3 cent tax increase, the state puts a limit on how high we can raise our tax rate as a school district. In 2018, voters in Frisco ISD actually approved for us to go up to the maximum tax rate that's allowable by law. It was a 17-cent increase on our maintenance and operations budget at the time. Since then, lawmakers have been really interested in property tax relief for homeowners, and they've passed some legislation which has required us to reduce our tax rate, which I think we're all appreciative of as homeowners in Frisco ISD. But our tax rate has gone down by almost 42 cents since 2018, since voters last approved a tax rate increase. So this is essentially asking for about 3 cents back of what was approved back in 2018.
So it's gone down 42 cents and we're asking for 3 cents back. I just want to make sure I've got that right.
That's right.
All right, let's move on to the bond program. Can one of you explain how the projects were chosen?
So really, you've got to go back a couple of years. When we start this process, basically the operations team goes out to all the different areas in the district and says, what do you think you need to be successful over the next 5 to 7 years? And, whether it's fine arts or athletics or buildings and maintenance, everybody kind of comes up with their lists of what they think they need to be successful. And then that list gets vetted out by our leadership team. And some projects make it and some projects don't make it. And then about a year ago, a citizens bond committee was formed, and students, teachers, staff, parents, non-parents, about 75 people were on that group, and they started vetting the projects as well. So it gets vetted several times, and then kind of by the end of their process last spring, that group was asked to vote on each project, and they needed to get an 80% vote rate to make it into the program. So it started about 2 years ago with this really wide net that we cast where we talked about lots of different projects, and it kind of concluded last April-May timeframe with the Citizens Bond Committee firming up a recommendation to the board. And then in August, the board voted to move forward with the projects recommended by the Citizens Bond Committee.
Thank you. There are 3 bond propositions. Proposition B is for district-wide improvements and a new Staley Middle School. Proposition C is for technology, and Proposition D is for a tennis center. Let's start with Proposition B. What kind of district-wide improvements are we talking about?
I think the bulk of Proposition B is in 3 major projects. We have what we call our 25-year refresh, then we have general maintenance, and then we have paving and landscape repairs. And those 3 major projects will touch every campus in Frisco ISD in one way or another. The 25-year refresh, one of the things that we have learned, just like if you have an older home that you have to take care of, every so many years you have to replace some of the major systems in your home. And about every 25 years, we need to replace the major systems in a building in order to maintain its longevity. So 25 years, when we're going in and doing invasive work to replace some of those major systems, it's also a good time for us to update finishes and learning spaces, flooring, paint, that kind of thing. So we have 20 schools that will be turning 25 years old in the next 5 years over the duration of this bond program. So those 20 schools would be slated to get a major 25-year refresh. Then you have all of our other schools that have pieces of their facilities that need to be updated, not to the degree of a 25-year refresh. So things like needing to replace boilers or needing to repaint or recarpet in high traffic areas, things like that, just to continue to extend the life of those buildings. And then, Todd, do you want to talk about the paving a little bit?
Yeah, one of the things that sticks out to me most in this piece, besides the 25-year renovations, that's the biggest part, is landscaping. And last year we did a thing where our whole leadership team stood up in front of every PTA president and just said, "Hey, you guys ask us any question you want to ask us." And we got a question or two about learning and about grading and things like that, but 90% of the questions were about how the exterior of our buildings look. And it's a real thing as you drive around the district and look at our flat work, the concrete work, parking lots. We definitely need some TLC in that area in this bond program. It's really the first bond program that's had a portion that specifically addresses those things. So that's a big part, I think, that's going to help the exterior of our buildings look like we expect them to.
There are other projects within Proposition B. You mentioned the new Staley Middle School. We had some money allocated in the 2018 bond program, still have it allocated actually, to renovate Staley, to provide a 25-year refresh to that building. We did provide 25-year refreshes to some of our other older elementary schools during the 2018 bond program. We began the work on the 25-year refresh for Staley, and what we learned was Staley actually has cast iron plumbing. It was built in the 70s, and it runs right through the middle of the school. So in order to do a true comprehensive 25-year refresh to that building, we would need to do some work on that plumbing. And that kind of work can't be done in a summer while students are out of the building. So continuing with that refresh would have required us to potentially displace students out of that school during the school year. So the bond committee talked about those options and ultimately settled on a recommendation to build a new Staley Middle School, and we happen to have land right next door that we could build it on, to prevent students from being displaced while that building is being built. And then once the building is built and students can move over, we can go in and renovate Staley the way it needs to be renovated with no students in the building, and we can repurpose at least a portion of that building for our Aspire program, which is a special education program that serves students who have graduated from high school and are transitioning out into the real world and learning some of those vocational skills to help them be successful after graduation.
I think, just to stay on Staley for a second, we've gotten a little negative feedback that we did not use the $20 million that Kim just referred to that was in the 2018 bond program to refresh Staley. And I think to her point with the cast iron plumbing under the building, once we found that out and we knew how invasive this project was going to be, we wanted to be smart about it. And it wasn't necessarily popular, but what we didn't want to do is do a $20 million renovation to make the building look pretty and it still be sitting on cast iron plumbing in a subgrade that was going to have to be torn up probably in the next 5 to 7 years.
Just for our audience, for clarification, Staley was built in what year?
73.
So 50-year-old plumbing.
50-year-old plumbing, right, yeah.
And then do you know if the Proposition B were to pass, when would the new Staley open for students?
One kind of cool thing about building the building next door to it is you could just get going on it, and most buildings, they have to open August, or some districts will open them in December. You could literally get going on Staley as soon as possible, and it could finish on October 2nd of a school year, and the students could literally just walk across the parking lot and start their new school. So it looks like the plan right now would be, if this were successful, to get going on Staley as soon as possible, then move the kids in when the building's done, move the students in when the building's done.
I've heard fall of 26. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's what we're shooting for.
Let's move on to Proposition C, or the technology proposition. What's all included in that proposition?
So we replace technology devices on a 5-year rotation schedule for both students and staff. Frisco ISD is a 1-to-1 technology district, meaning every student, kindergarten through 12th grade, has a device available to them either in their classroom for some of our elementary kiddos, or that they can take home with them for our middle and high school kids. So those devices have a useful life. They get outdated and they need to be replaced. So we've established a 5-year rotation cycle for those. This technology proposition would continue that 5-year replacement cycle. It would also provide some updated network equipment as well as additional wireless access points throughout the district. One of the things that we have been working on over the past several years is just increasing the Wi-Fi, the connectivity that we have district-wide, especially now that state testing is all done online and you have all of the students in a grade level or in a building who are online at one time taking a test. Wi-Fi is something that we need to make sure we have a really robust system.
Proposition D is a new tennis center. Compared to the other bond proposals, this one kind of stands on its own. Why do we need a new tennis center?
I think need is a strong word. I think when we, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, a couple of years ago, we started with different departments, and one of the things identified from our athletics department was tennis. And it'll be interesting when the state 5A tennis rankings come out. 8 of our 12 high schools will be ranked in the top 20. We're quietly a tennis powerhouse. Centennial High School actually won the state championship last year. And we currently rent space in other districts to have our district tennis meet because we don't have a facility that will house all of those tennis athletes. And this was one, it was actually taken to the bond committee in a different form. What the original recommendation was less courts and some indoor courts so that we could practice tennis when there's inclement weather out. And the bang for the buck just wasn't there for our Citizens Bond Committee. It was expensive because it was indoor. It was about twice the cost of what this tennis center is, and it was less courts. And the feedback from the Citizens Bond Committee was, if you can find a way to get more courts and gets the cost down, this is something we would look at. So we reworked that project and took it back to the Citizens Bond Committee, and they were happy with how it turned out. And that's when it ended up going to our board for the vote after the kind of rework from our Citizens Bond Committee.
As we've been out presenting over the past few weeks, a question that we hear a lot is what happens if some of these measures pass but others don't?
I think first and foremost, regardless of what passes or what doesn't, Frisco ISD is still going to be in the business of educating kids. And we're still going to figure out a way to make sure that students in Frisco ISD get everything that they need to have a great education. If the VATRE were to fail, we would continue to look at our operating budget and ways that we can get ourselves back to a balanced budget, hopefully in ways that are as far away from the classroom as possible. If any of the bond propositions were to fail, we would have to go back and look at our long-term facilities plans to determine what kind of maintenance we're going to defer and what kind of maintenance is critical. Some of that maintenance may need to come out of our operations budget, which is the budget that we use to pay staff salaries and pay for student programming. But we will move to a model where we're maintaining our facilities as best we can, but a lot of that maintenance would be deferred.
Todd, can you speak to some of the implications of deferring maintenance?
Well, first, it gets more expensive, and more things tend to break down. If one thing breaks and you don't have a solution for it, you're kicking the can down the road and making it worse and worse over time is the short answer.
What common questions are you getting that we haven't discussed yet today?
One thing that I have seen online is the question about why are we proposing renovating all of these buildings when districts around us are talking about or actually closing buildings due to low enrollment? Do we think we're going to get ourselves into that situation?
I think it's a good question, and really, to me, there's two separate conversations here. A lot of the districts to our south who have recently announced that they're closing buildings, they've also recently passed bond programs to renovate and rebuild buildings. So a lot of these districts reached their peak enrollment 10 or 12 years ago, and they're pretty far ahead of us on the curve. Closing buildings is not something that we're having active conversations about right now. It could be a part of our future. We don't really know that at this point, but what our focus is renovating and maintaining the buildings that we have and keeping